was a very important message. She had to tell me what she was going to say, and so I didn't pay enough attention, so I needed to. And you know what? It's absolutely okay for us to stop and listen to the voice of children. God corrects me on a very regular basis through the voice of my children, because they actually stop and listen and hear when we're way too busy. This morning we are reading out of Mark 12, and it's Mark 12, 28 through 31. And so we're going to continue our study through looking at neighbors. What is a neighbor? What does it look like to love our neighbor as ourselves? And so Mark 12, this is getting a little crackly, and I'm not sure why that is. So if it doesn't fix, I may go to a handheld in a minute. If you can't hear me because of it, just tell me, okay? But this morning the scripture is Mark 12, 28 through 31. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he had answered them well, asked him, which commandment is most important of all? And Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And you shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Today, we're talking about this journey about figuring out who our neighbor is and how to love them. Last week, we discussed who is our neighbor. And we got to a place that everyone is our neighbor. Today, we're going to spend our time talking about loving them and what it means to follow this commandment given by Jesus. And then we're going to talk about some practical ways to do that. This is something that I love doing. Like, I just want to get a stool, I want to sit down, and I want to have this practical conversation, because this is where the Bible gets legs. It's not just something that we read, it's not just something that we talk about, but this is where it gets real, and we're able to actually do it, and we're able to engage in it. Last week we talked about convenience being a factor in loving our neighbor, and we're going to talk about some ways to help with that, so that in the moment of decision, we're more likely to make the right decision. We won't get it right all of the time, and we know that, but there are things we can do to help us get it right more of the time. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. So, if we're going to follow this commandment to love our neighbor, we have to look at, how do we love ourselves? What am I willing to do for me? What would I do to make sure that I was taken care of? I can say things like, I love myself enough to make sure that I've eaten today. I love myself enough. Hey Barney, do you have that microphone back there? Sorry about that, guys. I couldn't focus. It was too crackly for me to pay attention. So what would I do to make sure I was taken care of? Okay, I would say things like, I love myself enough to make sure that I have a place to sleep tonight. That I love myself enough to make sure that I'm not falling into addiction. Okay? But oftentimes we put ourselves on a different standard than others. Now, I don't think it's intentional, and I don't think it's meant to be hurtful, but sometimes, maybe out of self-protection, we hold ourselves to a different standard. We hold ourselves to a different level. Today, we are going to talk about some things that would be normal for us to do for ourselves, but we might not do for our neighbors. So who is our neighbor? This is an actual question. Who is our neighbor? Everyone. That's right. Good. If I do that like 3 or 4 more times, maybe people will respond. Okay, I'm not saying we're responsible to provide for everyone, but I am saying that when someone is without and we have the ability to help, that we need to help them at the same level we would want for ourselves. I know there's a small homeless population in Ripley, about 10 from what anyone can tell me. So we don't see a large amount of people sitting beside the road begging. That's just not something that's real normal. But for those of you that have been around that in other cities, when someone has a sign that says they're hungry and a paper cup in their hand, what is normal when you walk by? What would be a normal reaction to them? Well, normally it's one of 2 things. Either nothing, we avoid eye contact and we keep walking, or we politely give them the 37 cents that's from our pocket as we go by, okay? And then we get to feel like we did something, so we don't have guilt, but we weren't inconvenienced by giving them our time to talk to them or any real amount of money, okay? So let's weigh this against love your neighbor as yourself. If we were in a place that we had to beg, how would we feel about someone not even being able to make eye contact with us? Or someone giving us not even enough change for a cup of coffee, let alone a meal that we actually need? The reality is that would be heartbreaking at best. This is one of 1,000 scenarios where we could encounter someone needing God's love. I've had the person in front of me at the grocery store not able to pay for their groceries. More times than I can remember. Someone stuck on the side of the road needing a hand. And we could spend the better part of the afternoon naming off opportunities to share God's love in a moment of crisis. But instead of trying to guess where God is going to do that, we're going to talk about what to do when he does. My sister, a couple years ago, helped me start making some pre-decisions. Okay, and that means deciding how I would act before the situation arose. So maybe the situation was running into someone that hadn't eaten in 2 or 3 days. Okay? Believe it or not, that happens all the time. We've encountered this over and over and over. Since I've been here, I've had this situation come up twice with people coming into the church. Okay? Just thinking through that a little bit and then deciding, how would you want someone to show you the love of God if that was us? Well, if we haven't eaten in a couple days, we probably want to eat, right? That makes sense, okay? Spare change is nice, and enough of it will get us something at the gas station, but it's not how we wish somebody would bless us in that crisis. If I'm hungry, I would want someone to feed me. So some pre-decisions might look like going to McDonald's and buying some $10 gift cards and throwing them in our purse or our car. And so when we encounter that situation, we don't have to try to convince ourselves that it's okay to spend $10 on it because that money's already been set aside to give to somebody in need. Maybe it's tucking a $20 bill in our wallet. And when we encounter that situation, we can take someone to the diner and buy them a hot meal. And we don't have to argue with ourselves about, is this okay? Because that money had a purpose from the very beginning, to be used for God. For some reason, we have an emotional connection to our money. And we don't like to talk about it because we know that that's wrong. And so we don't like to admit it. But the reality is we have this emotional connection to our money. And it's difficult to make snap decisions to give it to anyone else. That's why deciding before that moment that a certain amount is set aside for that purpose, it takes the pressure out of the situation, and it doesn't allow our greed to stop us from loving people. It's one of the reasons that we tithe. It's not because God needs our money. The streets of heaven are paved in gold. Let me assure you that the ministry of God will continue. We tithe because it helps release it from us, and it helps us unclench our fist, and it helps us to be free with the gift that God gave us. I can remember times that I've gotten it right, and I can remember times that I have just missed it. There was a man, he asked me to buy him some gas. Needed to get to work. He was in a hard place, couldn't get there the next day. Can't get to work, he can't make money. It's a vicious cycle. And he'd made some bad life decisions that put him in that place, but he needed help getting some gas. I'd made a decision in advance that I had $50 set aside for whatever God needed it for. Took a $50 bill, folded it up, put it in my wallet, and I said, God, this is yours when you need it. When the opportunity came, I knew what to do. I took him and I bought him gas, and it was him and 2 little girls. After we got gas, we had money left over. I said, you guys want to go get something to eat? We went and we sat down. I said, girls, get whatever you want. And you'd have thought it was Christmas. They didn't know what to do. No one had ever told them they could order whatever they wanted before. And they ordered a hamburger. And they sat there and they looked at it and they didn't know what to do because it was so big. And I watched this little girl, and she took 2 bites of her hamburger and about got sick because she hadn't eaten in days. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that's truly hungry, but someone that's truly hungry can't eat because their stomach's too small. That man started coming to Bible study in the evening. Because we'd do a dinner and Bible study, and he could feed his little girls. He could feed himself, but he got the word of Jesus. His little girls started coming to a Wednesday night outreach we were doing that worked through the book of John. And I can see, looking back now, how a couple dollars spent on gas led to people hearing about Jesus. Led to a family hearing about Jesus. But I think about times like 2 years ago at National Gathering. We were in Colorado Springs, and I failed. My hotel room was about 5 blocks from the church where we were gathering. And I walked back and forth from there. And one evening I walked to my hotel, and this particular evening there was a cold warning. There was a dangerous cold warning, and it needed to be. It was right around 0, maybe a little below, and the wind started blowing, and so the wind chill was down in the negatives, and it was cold. And I was hustling to my room to warm up, and I passed a man propped up in the entryway of a shop that had closed for the night. And by propped up, I mean he was sitting on the ground in the door. And he was kind of got his back against one side and his feet up against the other side, and an old military coat draped over him. And I saw him, and I made eye contact with him. And then I went to my hotel room and I slept in my king-size bed. And when I got up in the morning and made my way to the church, I had forgotten about him. I didn't even remember that moment until I saw him in the same place with ice built up on his beard from being out in the cold. And I got sick to my stomach because I had a chance to help. Not forever, but I could have helped with the night that it was that cold, that it was so cold, that ice built up on his beard. I know what it takes to get that. And it makes me sick. that I miss that. I can think about times I've got it right at the grocery store and times that I've missed it. There was an evening I went to the store, my family wanted ice cream. And so I jump in the car and I drive a couple blocks to the store and I grab a little ice cream and I get in the line. And the woman in front of me, I've known since elementary school. We've grown up together in the same town. I've known her almost all my life. And she just looks terrible. She just pours out her heart and she tells me how everything in her day that could have went wrong, how she has a sore throat now, she feels like she's getting sick, she can't miss work because she can't afford it, everything that can go wrong is going wrong, and she just wants ice cream and to go to bed. And we can relate to that feeling at the end of the day where it's like, I just want to eat an ice cream and go to bed, right? I told the cashier to put hers with mine and say, go home and eat your ice cream. I told her God loves her and I hope she had a better day the next day. $3 worth of ice cream. And this woman was a waiter at the local diner. And she told every single person that she served for the next couple days how when she felt like garbage, someone bought her ice cream and told her that God loved her. And $3 worth of ice cream made a difference, not in her life, but in 200 other people's lives, because the love of God passed through her onto them, and she gave a testimony of someone loving her when she was down. By God's grace, I got that one right. But I can remember being in the grocery line and watching a woman load her groceries up on the belt in front of me. Normal stuff. The cashier rings it all up, bags it all up, goes back into her cart. She goes to pay it. The card doesn't work. The cashier says, oh, sometimes that happens. Try it again. She tries it again. No, it didn't work. Okay, let me try another card. She tries a second card. And the second card doesn't work. And I watch despair come over her face. And she looked embarrassed and she looked frustrated and she said, I'll be right back. I have to run to my car. And I knew I should have just taken care of it, but I sat there arguing with myself about the money. If I pay $200 for her groceries, what does that do to my family's grocery budget? If I do this, are we going to have enough for us to get through the month? What'll happen? Is this okay? Maybe I should ask my wife. And I have this argument, and I go over in my head, and I go over in my head, and I finally get to a place that I say, why am I arguing? I need to just take care of this. God, I hear you. Why am I not just doing this? I told the cashier, I said, I'm going to go get her, and I'm going to take care of this. Just one moment. And I walked outside to grab her from her car, but she was gone. I convinced myself to pay, but it was too late. I missed it. Because I was arguing with myself over money. And because of that, someone didn't have food. No, I don't carry guilt because Jesus came for freedom, and I am free. But I can still see her face when she realized she couldn't pay. But it's not always about money. Sometimes it's as easy as being with someone else. It's as easy as spending time. This letter came to me this week from someone I don't know. And I love it. It's just, God's so awesome like that. If one of you sent me this letter, then grab me after and let me know, but I have no idea who this is. So, it says his name is Bill. He has wild hair, wears a t-shirt with holes in it, jeans, and no shoes. And this was literally his wardrobe for his entire 4 years of college. He's brilliant, kind of crazy, but very bright. And he became a Christian while attending college. Across the street from the campus is a well-dressed, very conservative church. They want to develop a ministry to the students, but are not sure how to go about it. One day, Bill decides to go there. He walks in with no shoes, jeans, his t-shirt, and wild hair. Now the service had already started, and so Bill starts down the aisle looking for a seat. The church is completely packed and he can't find one. And some people are really looking a bit uncomfortable, but no one wants to say anything. Bill gets closer and closer, closer to the pulpit, and when he realizes there are no seats, he just squats right down in the front in the carpet. Although perfectly acceptable behavior at a college fellowship, this had never happened in this church before. By now, the people are really uptight, the tension in the air is thick, and about this time, the minister realizes that from far away, at the back of the church, a deacon is slowly making his way towards Bill. Now, the deacon is in his 80s, has silver gray hair, and a three-piece suit. A godly man, very elegant, very dignified, very courtly. And he walks with a cane, and as he starts walking towards this boy, everyone's saying to themselves, well, you can't blame him for what he's about to do. How can you expect a man of his age and his background to understand some college man on the floor? It takes a long time for the man to reach the boy, and the church is utterly silent except for the clicking of the man's cane. All eyes are focused on him. You can't even hear anyone breathing. The people are thinking this minister can't even preach the sermon until the deacon does what he has to do. And now they see this elderly man drop his cane to the floor. And with great difficulty, he lowers himself and sits down next to Bill and worships with him so he won't be alone. Everyone chokes up with emotion. And when the minister gains control, he says, what I'm about to preach you'll never remember, but what you've just seen you'll never forget. Be careful how you live. You may be the only Bible some people will ever read. Sometimes it's not about money and helping someone in a situation, but sometimes it's about coming up and sitting on the floor with someone, even though that wouldn't be normal to us. It takes them away from being alone. It makes them feel like part of a community. Sometimes it's about joining people where they are in life. I received a text on Friday from a woman I hadn't thought about in a very long time. She was a neighbor to me when my life literally depended on it. A piece of my testimony is a road trip when I was 19 years old. I drove 8 hours to see some friends over the weekend. It was a pretty normal weekend. We hung out, we had fun, and then I came home. The road I was on, it just winds through the mountains next to the river for hours and hours. It was beautiful. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't remember all of it, but I remember that I was off the road to the right. And there's a cliff here and snow markers here and then the road. And I was over here and I was hitting snow markers. And I pulled the wheel and my pickup spun all the way around in the road and I was facing the wrong direction. And I had a moment where I thought, I'm gonna be okay. It spun around and it almost stopped and I thought just for a second, okay, we're okay. And that moment ended very quickly when I started to roll. And I rolled 3.5 times down a 75-foot cliff and landed in a river in February. 3.5 is an important number because I didn't land topside up. I rolled that extra half time and landed my truck upside down in the river. And I was trapped. I hit the water and I remember thinking, I have to get out. I have to get out of this truck or I'm gonna drown. There's water in here, I can't breathe, I'm holding my breath, and I go back to driver's ed and they taught me you gotta get your seatbelt off. And that made sense, and so I tried to get my seatbelt off. Problem with that is I'm hanging upside down and my pressure on that wouldn't allow the seatbelt to release and I was stuck. And I thought, okay, the second thing I remember is you gotta break a window out so you can get out. And so I just start swinging, just swinging as hard as I can. Later, I found out there wasn't even a window there. My roof had been caved down so far that I was just punching the top of my car. I didn't even know it. I almost broke my arm hitting it so hard. I was stuck. I was underwater. And I couldn't get out. And after trying and trying and trying, I finally hit a place that I realized I had no ability to fix it. And I made peace with it. And I realized it was my last breath, and I passed out. But God wasn't done with me. Because behind me, unbeknownst to me, was a car carrying 2 ER nurses. And the car behind them was a vascular surgeon. And they swam into this freezing river, and they pulled me out of my truck. They drugged me back to the bank, and they started working on me. And when I woke up on the bank, I realized I would have died in that hunk of metal in the river. They were a neighbor to me. They saved me in my moment of need. I wanted to tell this story today to highlight their sacrifice in a moment. They didn't have to risk getting in a fast-flowing river. They didn't have to risk getting into an icy cold river where they're probably going to get hypothermia themselves. They didn't have to risk trying to climb into the cab of a truck that could shift at any moment and actually injure them. They didn't have to do that. But they were a neighbor to me. I wanted to tell that part of the story to say they were my neighbor. But there's more to this story that I can't just not tell, okay? This woman that texted me on Friday, she was one of the nurses that was behind me. She wasn't a Christian that day. In fact, she wouldn't become a Christian until 15 years later, okay? But as she got out of her car and she scrambled down this cliff to get to the bank, she heard a voice say, "Get in the water." Audibly heard a voice say, "Get in the water." Not a voice of a man, but the voice of God. She doesn't believe in God. She doesn't know God. And yet God spoke to her. When I woke up on the bank, there were 4 people around me. Here, 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 and here. Surgeon's over here. He's asking me questions. Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Do you know what happened to you? I'm trying my best to answer. Little confused. The nurses are both over here. They're taking blood pressure. They're poking at me, taking temperature, doing everything they can to take care of me. And there was one man up by my head on my left, just holding my hand. And when Isabella grabs my hand, it's too big. So she just grabs a finger. You know what that's like when a little kid just grabs your finger because they can't get your hand? That was how it was with this man. He just had these hands that were so big I couldn't grab his hand. I was just holding the finger, and he just said, "You're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right." The ambulance got there and they sent a board down the cliff to me and they strapped me to it. But we went down a cliff and there's no way to haul me back up. Everybody that's down there scrambled down, and a pickup came by with a winch on it. So they let the winch down the cliff and they hook onto me, and everybody holds onto the board, and they winch us back up this cliff, get me in an ambulance and fly me to a trauma hospital. I get there, they figure out that I've broken my nose and chipped a tooth and just about broke my arm trying to get out. But aside from hypothermia, I'm by and large just fine. They keep me overnight, and the surgeon that was there comes to see me the next day. And we're talking and just trying to work through things. And I asked him, I said, "I know you were here. And the 2 nurses, they were here, right?" He says, "Yes." And I said, "And who was the man that was over here holding my finger?" And he got confused. He looked at me and said, there was There was nobody there that looked like that. And I didn't know just exactly what to do with that until 2 years later. My mother was reading a book. And the book was called The Man that Spoke with Angels. And it's a biography about a pastor that has had several encounters with angels. And she reads it and she calls me. She says, "You need to read this book." And I open it up. And the very first description of an encounter that he has is the spitting image of the man that sat there and held my hand and said, "You're going to be all right." He said, "You're going to be all right." The reason I stand here and proclaim the good news of Jesus is because I've seen his work. Because he spared my life. Because I know without a doubt that he's real. The reason I get to do it is because he sent someone to be my neighbor. He sent someone to love me in my moment of need. Today's challenge, what I pray that God works in our lives, is some things we can make decisions about before we need to. Some pre-decisions we can make. So that when the time comes, we can love our neighbor as we would want to be loved. I would pray that we have ears to hear God's direction in that. And I would pray for the self-control to not argue with him and miss the moment. Let's pray. Father, we praise you for being God. And we praise you for being in our life, not just something that we have to blindly trust, but genuinely a part of our life, someone that we have relationship with, someone that wants to be a part of everything we do. Father, I pray that you would help us to see how to serve you, who to give your love to. Help us to not fall into the greed that so easily overtakes us, but allow us to give. Father, whether that's time or money or a hug, God, I pray that you would just show us how to give your love freely to people. That we could create a culture where that's normal, where it's normal for someone to just feel loved. Father, I praise you for this place and for brothers and sisters to worship you with. I pray that you receive glory and honor and praise because we came here today. Father, I love you and I praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.